Imagine an alternate universe where we've just invented copper wire and we've discovered that it can carry electric current efficiently from point A to point B. And we just know that this is going to change everything. But we don't know why yet because we haven't yet invented the light bulb. As soon as that light bulb gets invented, as soon as we imagine, making electric motors out of these things, as soon as we even go a step further and start transmitting digital signals, everything is transformed. And the situation that we have right now is to just understand that we are now all in possession of this copper wire.
Peter, Vijay, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this super important topic. Peter, I want to start with you. You're a research leader who's got incredible expertise in healthcare for many, many years. I want you to help us understand the landscape of the U.S. healthcare industry and why AI was such a good fit for the transformation of that industry.
I think most technologists, when they start to think about healthcare, they zoom in on diagnostics.
Yeah.
How to make a better algorithm to read a radiological image. How to build a predictive model, maybe to stratify risks in a group of patients. But after you really get serious about this, you realize that the world of healthcare is so much bigger than that. And in fact, diagnostics, while very important, it can really make a difference in advancing human health, is probably not in the top 5 issues that healthcare leaders are really confronting today.
Interesting.
And so what are those issues? Well, I think one that probably occupies the minds of any CEO of a major healthcare system is cost. Finances. Costs continue to increase while reimbursements for healthcare delivery are constrained or even in some cases are going down, putting many of these organizations not only in a zero growth situation but in a negative growth financial situation. In the COVID pandemic, what got exposed are horrible inequities. There was a 3x difference in mortality, for example, for African Americans versus white Americans from the COVID pandemic. And it just really exposed some systemic issues in access and inequity. There is a huge question about information overload and data. There's multiple petabytes of health data being generated every day. That is actually a serious cost. Billions of dollars of cost to healthcare systems, and yet there's a sense in which we're not getting the value out of that data. Mm-hmm. And then there is the question of, how do we stay on top of this rapidly evolving technology? That technology is not only something that is creating a fear of missing out, but is actually changing and accelerating the evolution of the regulatory landscape. And that's just creating mountains of paperwork, administration, regulations to stay on top of. And so all of those things just end up being, in some ways, so much bigger in the minds of healthcare leaders than the techie attraction to diagnostics. Okay. But indeed, we did focus a lot on machine learning and AI at the beginning. Okay. So for example, we have been very proud of the work that we've done in medical imaging.
Right. But that's on the imaging side. And so as a transformative agent on the business side, you've got 2 different lanes that you're kind of running in here. Talk a little bit more about that transformation of the things that you mentioned as far as what the people that run the business are concerned about.
Yeah, well, very quickly we started to understand that one of our roles as a technology company would be in understanding the data challenges. And one of the fundamental things there, where there's alignment between what Microsoft thinks it can do and its business and the needs in healthcare delivery would be the enablement of the cloud for data, as well as the AI services that would apply to health data.
Okay.
And so we worked extremely hard, actually even with government regulators and our competitors, to try to move the cloud ecosystem to a place where it could, in very practical, efficient, and cost-effective ways, accommodate the data needs in the cloud and shift the IT infrastructure off of on-premise services into the cloud. And a huge amount has been done there. And once you have that, then you have the ability to contemplate making meaningful differences in the productivity and efficiency. And the very first thing that we tried to work on there was just to reduce the administrative and clinical note-taking burden of doctors and nurses on the front line.
I mean, why pick healthcare as your kind of first foray into a transformation of a business?
The way Microsoft operates, it would not be us doing it. It would be us supporting and assisting the real players, the real incumbents in the healthcare world to affect this shift.
And so now might be a good time for some success stories, just from the field of healthcare to start with. We'll get into some others in a bit, but what worked with AI and why?
You know, one of the things that we've seen with the rise of generative AI is the incredible ability of generative AI systems to be an ambient listening device, to listen to a doctor-patient conversations. Probably a lot of people have the experience of going to the doctor and the doctor is actually not making eye contact with the patient, but instead is sitting at a desk at a computer, taking notes. And you know, it's sensible that that happens because you, as my doctor, you have a life, you have a family at home. You don't want to take that note-taking work home with you. Actually, doctors, we've learned, have a term for that. It's called pajama time, when you take that work home. And so the power of generative AI to listen and set up that note automatically for just a quick review and minor edit, that has been proving to be transformational for doctors. Generative AI has not been with us that long, less than 2 years, but it has already sparked that kind of innovation. It just, you know, I think we're on the path, not only as Microsoft, but as an industry, to tremendous success here.
We'll go back because generative AI wasn't a thing 8 or even 5 years ago.
The key here is transformation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the transformation that you saw in the industry over those 8 years, and what did you think were the barriers, and how? Because I'd like to draw generative AI. Yes, the large language models came around 2018, right? But they didn't have enough of a transformation effect in 2016 and 17. So maybe we can just trace back to the waves of transformation and then sort of relate it to what we are seeing with generative AI and maybe what we are seeing in other industries.
Yeah, I think prior to generative AI, I think it's fair to say that the most successful technology adoptions you could characterize, roughly speaking, as drop-in enhancements of existing practices. And that's there's value there for sure, but it's fairly limited. It's not transformational in the way that Vijay, I think, is referring to. It doesn't fundamentally change the shape of the business. It doesn't fundamentally alter the processes and the business rules that companies operate under. I think what we're starting to see with generative AI is a more fundamental change or a rethink of how things should operate. When we talk about transformation, you're really talking about a fundamental change in the process of business between different stakeholders or different parties.
I mean, so Peter, what you just mentioned was, number one, bring trust into a situation, bring interop into a situation, and then you also hinted at different economic incentives. So, I mean, do you mind if I just give examples of 2 other industries and see whether one can learn from the other?
Yeah. I'd love to hear that.
Right, so logistics and supply chain. So is full of regulations. Each country guards its jurisdiction, its labor laws, country of origin, where are taxes being paid. There's constant gaming of the system, so the trust part. Have you really loaded the stuff that you said you did? Who's to blame? Right. And then there are resource limitations. So just like doctors have limited time, there's only so many tankers, there's only so many people who can do inspections. So how do you optimize that? And what was very interesting about this supply chain and logistics industry is since 1969, when the ISO standards for containers, what we call intermodal containers, the same container goes on a truck, train, and a ship came about. And since then, we've seen total visibility of the supply chain, total ability to interop data between people, standardization of things like bill of lading, bills of inspection. So my inspector can swap in for your inspector because all of us follow the same process. And of course, things like GPS helped, right? IoT helped by putting RFID on every container. Internet helped, cloud helped. Yeah. But that industry transformed itself to the level that, if you go back a bit further back, Michael Dell was able to come up with this idea of build your own computer. Yeah. All right, don't have to get it off the stop. And now you have companies delivering in 15 minutes in e-commerce. So that, to me, is full of economic incentives, disincentives for people to interop. The shipping company doesn't really want to help the train company. It wants to keep, and yet they transform. Yeah. And the other example I'll give is banking. So banking is just as globally and systemically important. As healthcare, in the sense that people probably are more conscious of their physical health than of their financial health. They don't even know when they have financial ill health. And this industry has a major new driver, which is since 2019, the regulations starting from Europe and Britain, which I guess is separate from Europe, are about interchange. It's called open finance access. So if I'm a bank, I have to give Eurofintech access to what a customer has done with me. So again, huge amount of regulations. Right. There have been some major successes in this. How did you help people align incentives? How did you help people, create win-win? How did you get to interop?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, and there's so much insight and subtle insight in what you've just said. First off, just a comment about trust. Trust is something that has been one of the most profound lessons that we in Microsoft Research have learned by embedding and working shoulder to shoulder with our healthcare customers and partners. In fact, I don't even know if healthcare organizations realize it, because over the past 100 years, I think they've just developed a culture and a set of practices and cultural norms that have the effect of all day, every day, re-earning the trust of their customers, their patients. It's different in the tech industry. This is something that we've had to learn as we've worked with them. And connected to that in a strange way, your examples of logistics and shipping, of finance, speak to something that in tech terms we refer to as architecture. So what do I mean by architecture? The simple example is if we think about home building. When you think about home building, there's a block diagram. There's roofing systems, there's foundations, there's HVAC, plumbing, electrical, framing, and so on. And those architectural concepts enable not only me as a home builder to have separate contracts, subcontracts, with a carpenter, with a plumber, with an electrician, with a roofer, and so on, but it also allows innovators to address a market in an efficient way. So if an innovator, a startup, has a better idea for roofing, they have a whole market of roof systems that they can address. One of the challenges in health tech is it has lacked that kind of architecture. And so, if a bright innovator in the Silicon Valley has a better idea for some radiological imaging technology, they might even land a golden customer. Maybe it's Stanford, medicine, radiology. They're left to spend weeks, maybe even months, doing a custom integration of their technology into their IT systems. And then what they've done there doesn't apply to literally any other radiology department in the world because there is no standardized architecture. And because of that, you get this patchwork of custom solutions around the world, and each one of those has an impact, even on trust, on that erosion of trust.
So this architecture, I think, Peter, you're talking about, if an intelligent agent is able to access, with privacy controls and so on, information across the provider, the payer, and so on, and the insurer, is that how you're thinking about it, that the locus of the decision doesn't have to be with one company or another? Is that?
That's right. And in fact, you lower the barrier for any of those interactions because we now are on the verge of having technology, an artificial intelligence technology, that, like human beings, can look at data and understand the structure of that data. And in fact, because it's a machine, has a tireless ability to do that at scale. So a simple example, just to make that concrete, what I've just said, we have worked with the Providence Health System, where they have wanted to have more success in recruiting potential participants in some of their clinical trials. They have clinical records across their 51 hospitals. There's a lot of useful information, but no consistency across the types of records that are made across those 51 hospitals and across the clinical trial specifications for each of their research trials that are going on. A generative AI system based on OpenAI's GPT-4 is able to actually look across all of those clinical records and restructure them in a consistent way, just based on a common sense expert reading of those things, as well as clinical trial specifications, and successfully create a match for participants in those trials. And is able to do so at a cost of roughly 10 cents per participant match. It's just a small example of the possibilities that we have in our ability to just rethink fundamental business processes across the board.
Tell me some stories of where you've seen some success here, and then maybe also add a little bit of where you ran into a roadblock, because if I'm the person making the decision, I want to know the reality here, because this is not inconsequential.
Well, in fact, one of the questions that Vijay and I and many others here get all the time is, what's the roadmap?
Right.
How do we get started
Exactly
with
that.
this? Yeah, and at least for healthcare leaders, my recommendation generally is to start with products that have been designed and developed incorporating generative AI specifically for healthcare work, for healthcare delivery work. And to start there. There is oftentimes an impulse, some of it is fear of missing out, but some of it also is well thought out. There's an impulse to want to start immediately with customized technology development and fine-tuning. And I think that that's not the right way generally to start, not in these constrained environments. So for example, we talked a little bit about ambient listening and clinical note-taking. There are now hundreds of products on the market. We have a good one. If you are a healthcare organization that uses Epic or any other major EHR system, you now have options to choose those kinds of things as add-ons to that existing technology. And those are smart investments, I think, because while you won't see an instant improvement in the efficiency of your clinicians, in study after study, including some controlled clinical studies, there is a report of dramatic reduction in cognitive burden, which long-term should result in better outcomes, in reduced burnout, lower turnover rates, and so on. And so it's a way to really get started. There is then the policy issue in what you might call off-label use by your frontline workers. Workers literally taking their mobile phones out and using Microsoft Copilot application or a ChatGPT application. And so investing in training, in the development of sound policies for control of that type of use, I think is a second thing to do in parallel with that first. Once you get up to speed with that, then there can be the contemplation of customized development of technology. And one of the very first ones that we recommend is the use of something called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And RAG, roughly speaking, means giving a generative AI system the permission to use the data tools that you've already invested in, giving it the ability to use database queries on your private data in order to endow more of your staff with their own personal data assistants. But Vijay, you've talked at length about the right roadmap.
So I'll give an example of one particular company that's both in energy, which is carbon out, and also in carbon capture. So again, just like Peter said, there's two phases. The first one gives you value, which allows you to go for a slightly riskier one. So the first place these people applied generative AI, working with us, was in the area of gaming inside their supply chain. So all the work is done by outsourcers who and there's a lot of gaming that happens. People have the same SKU, the same service in different countries under slightly different names with different pricing, often affiliates that are different. And it's not just deliberate gaming. Sometimes people are under stress. A project is failing. And it's really important for me to know that because I'm going to get hit later on. So they had about 1,000 people whose entire job was just monitoring this every morning, looking at every news source, every Edgar filing, every case in courts, everything. And the point is, the 1,000 people costs this company something like $50 million, $80 million, but the potential was more than $1 billion. So it's not about productivity, it's about saying, I will be on top of my risk. I will understand risk, and I'm here to actually make my suppliers successful because they are my partners. So if they are running into problems, sometimes they don't know themselves. I can help them. So that's a new way of creating a relationship. So there we've seen 9 figures already, and I've lost track of them because I'm a researcher and there's no need for me to go in every day like I do a V1. But the other part we saw was them using it, and this is still work in progress, in carbon in. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides very interesting amounts of contribution or subsidy if you capture carbon, especially from things like cement factories, steel plants, and so on. But really, you have to bring the cost of capture and storage down in order to create a profit. So if you can create $20 a ton margin, there are gigatons to be had. So the only way this business made sense is if they could use sites that they already understood, where they've already done the subterranean survey, satellite imagery, they understood everything, and also use existing data and existing people to do this new business. Because setting up a business from scratch, the margin is just not there. So basically, one is radical, because it's a radical new relationship with your suppliers, where you're a platform for your suppliers to become successful in your industry. The second one is you entering an entirely new business, which you contemplated, but you would not have entered on scale. And I mean, without generative AI, it's very, very difficult to imagine that.
I think it's important for every person, every leader, to become to develop personal experience and intuitions about this. A few simple things that I do. First off, just for my own healthcare, when I receive my blood test results, or even more bizarre, the explanation of benefits notices from my insurer.
Those are fun.
Those are fun. Incidentally, I found even very few C-suite executives in health insurance companies are able to decode those things. It's magical to ask a generative AI system like Copilot or ChatGPT, can you take a look at this and explain it to me, and have a conversation about it. Right. Or in my job, leading Microsoft Research, I get sent drafts of new research abstracts and papers every day. I feel some obligation when it's coming from our own researchers to try to stay on top of things, but it's really too much. And so I actually ask Copilot, can you please read this paper, summarize it for me, and then I can ask a few follow-up questions. And that is something that is just extremely helpful to me. And what it shows is the power of these systems to do review and summarization. When you are talking also to these systems, you start to think a little bit differently. Right now, we've all been trained through web search to be very concise, just give our queries as a few keywords and so on. Now here you start to realize, you actually have to think in a different way, be more conversational. But then the second and more fundamental question is this thing going to be a useful collaborator, an augment to me? Is it willing to, and is it able to spot my errors and call me out on it and have a conversation? And that idea is just something that is brand new. We've never had a technology before that could be that kind of augmenting collaborator.
It feels like we're talking about zeitgeist here, and there's cultural changes and shifts in profound ways. I think some people are on sort of the cusp end of it, and others are more experienced. So what does that mean, though, for businesses that are looking at this and discovering, having their aha moment, like, wait, I don't have to do this by myself?
Well, I think what we were just talking about is the fact that, isn't it remarkable that the most powerful AI model available today, which is OpenAI's GPT-4, is available for free.
Yeah.
Through either Microsoft Copilot or OpenAI. But what is even more important to understand are two things. One is it's available for free as a chatbot, but this is not fundamentally a chatbot technology.
Right.
This is a technology that is able to understand the products of human thought and expression. And so when that technology is integrated into tools, maybe operating in the background, not as a chat agent at all, that's when the huge value will be unlocked. But the wonderful thing is that everybody, from a CEO down to every frontline worker, can gain experience with what this is through chat today. That's one. The second is just to repeat something that Sam Altman famously said just a few weeks ago. GPT-4 and similar models that are out there today are the worst AI models that you'll ever use. And so the technology and the level of intensity in the research and development world is very, very significant. One way to measure that is up until recently, the most active area of global fundamental research is cancer research. And one measure of that is to look at the number of research papers and abstracts being published on a weekly basis. And in oncology, that's about 2,000 papers every week, which is a lot. It's actually, you could imagine it's not that surprising when you think about the amount of research funding that governments around the world put into oncology. Well, AI research has just surpassed that 2,000 paper a
Seriously?
week mark. And in fact, if you look at new open source language models, there are about 25 being posted every week on the repository called Hugging Face. For medicine specifically, generative AI applied to medicine, over the past 12 months, there have been over 1,800 papers generated. And in refereed top medical journals, like the Journal of the American Medical Association or the New England Journal of Medicine, there have been over 100 major generative AI in medicine papers published. So the level of intensity in research and therefore the rate of progress in the technology is pretty spectacular.
So if I'm a business, what do I make of this? How do I integrate this? This is like transformational culturally, not just in industry.
So, people often ask, they put it slightly differently. They say, am I ready to do something big with it? So, it's called technology readiness. In previous transformation waves, the barrier was a bit higher, right? You had to be on the cloud. You had to have mobile devices in the hands of everyone, or before that you had PCs in the hands of everyone. But as Peter said, right now, you can access the AI for free. I've spent time in Senegal, spent time in Rwanda recently, and people were using AI in very serious ways. Wow. But there's a difference between being able to access AI and getting maximal scale transformation benefit from it. Right. So we invert the process. So the advice really is, number one, you don't need to have lots of data. That's a beautiful thing about pre-trained models. They can work with just a few examples. I think, Peter, you once told me that even without trying, the first generation of like GPT-4 already has like 97% of sort of match on certain health knowledge tests. So there's a huge amount of knowledge already coming. You don't need that much data. You certainly don't need, it helps if you do, huge number of PhD data scientists. But what you do need is to be on the cloud, to scale. Otherwise, how do Peter and I communicate? How do we share our things? If it's on his PC, my PC, or on a private server, how do we communicate with a partner? How does that decision-making for pre-authorization happen unless the cloud readiness is there? So basically, things have now inverted. It's the AI part is easily accessible. But to really have its benefits go all the way, you need cloud, you need governance, you need the ability to impose policies and ethics from a central place and have visibility into what's going on. Right. So that's really, it's changed the pyramid.
And so maybe a couple of thoughts here. We are just at version 1 of these technologies. And you have to think of other technologies that really transform the way business works. If you just think about when we started to realize that networking computers together might be valuable.
That's a good idea.
Or that these mobile devices might be better. That first internet bears no resemblance to the internet of today. We didn't have the web. It was just an email network. Or think of the very first mobile device that you ever owned in your life and compare that to what it is today. So there's a sense in which that is the state of affairs today. As amazing as, and obviously amazing, and as obviously high potential as the technology is, we are just at the very beginning. And so strategically, you have to recognize that some of the concrete applications that you invest in today will be made obsolete very quickly, in the same way that very first BlackBerry or iPhone or Nokia phone was made obsolete. But at the same time, to Vijay's point, we know certain things will remain consistent. And to get onto platforms like the cloud that allow you to ride those technology waves in a more effective manner is just one strategic approach to making sure you're not missing a train that's leaving the station.
Talk a little bit about the next steps in generative AI models and help me understand why I should be thinking about other modes.
So do you mind if I start from the need and then have Peter talk about whether it's feasible and how soon is it feasible? Even.
Sure.
So we've seen in many of these technology waves that certain things that used to cost a lot of money and were coveted suddenly become very cheap. All the way to desktop publishing, to hire a real good print setter. Only so many people could do it, and you could do it only so many times, and suddenly everyone got it. Communications, instead of a phone call, it's now constant communications. If we look at two kinds of health, one is physical health, right? Why do I get a checkup only once a quarter or once every 6 months? And NBA and NFL, the athletes are checked up every day and they're in peak condition. In fact, they're performing better. Why is that not happening to me? And why is it that only some people can afford, financial asset management and financial asset advice? That actually has the time to talk about their life, their emotions, and the evolving family and job situation. So basically, what I'm seeing here in the future is, as I work with people, what I ask them is, what is it that's in short supply in your business today? And that you charge a lot for? And what happens when that becomes, the marginal cost of that starts approaching zero? Is it still the same service, or is it a very different service at that point?
Interesting.
So that's where the reason multimodality comes in is conversations and relationships in banking are the epitome of the coveted service. In health, having a concierge sort of doctor relationship or the old-fashioned family doctor relationship is what many people aspire to at least have nostalgia for.
Right.
And the question is, what if that becomes, or the sports coach and sports medicine, and in Seattle we have a lot of that. What if those things become zero? And of course, can they become zero without having multimodality? Because when I'm talking to you, I'm taking every signal I can get. So anyway, I just wanted to throw the problem at you, Peter, and not a solution.
Well, I think if I could geek out a little bit from the pure computer science research perspective, the large language models that people are using today have been trained to do next word prediction. And they've been trained on the output of human thought and expression. So they've learned the language of humans. And what's been so surprising to the world is that if you really want to do that well, if a computer wants to optimize its ability to predict the next word in a human conversation, it has to be able to do lots of other things. It has to be able to do deductive reasoning. It has to be able to do chain causes and effects. It has to be able to do some logic and some math and so on. But the fundamental technical architecture that can be optimized to do that, what we are learning as computer scientists can also be applied to learn the language of nature. So take protein dynamics, and you're trying to predict the next conformational structure of a protein. It's incredible that these models seem to work for that. Or take global weather patterns and try to predict the next stage, the next hours, kind of low and high pressure zones and wind directions. We're learning that these architectures are able to do those kinds of next structure predictions. Understand in a diffusion generative model. So diffusion, many of you may have used DALL-E 3 to generate an image. Yeah. Well, imagine if you can now say, well, I'm looking for a small molecule that would fit and have a high probability of binding with this specific drug target. We're finding that those diffusion models apply not only to the kinds of images that you and I would talk about, but to those types of conformational structures in physics, biology, and chemistry. And so from a computer science perspective, nothing could be more exciting. And each one of those is a new modality.
Right.
And then if you can develop enough data, training data, to get those to work well, and then integrate that into a language model so that now as a human being you can have conversations about these things. Well, you know, it just as researchers, it just gets us more excited than anything. You know, we as researchers try to be very careful about this. But one by one, we are starting to see more and more practical opportunities arise.
Yeah.
One that here at Microsoft Research we are particularly excited about is in the field of medical pathology. You know, where the ability to absorb a whole multi-terabyte digital pathology slide and really discern non-local effects in ways that would really defy human comprehension appears in early testing to have real clinical utility in diagnosing disease. That is something that's being tested in clinic right now, but that's just one of dozens of examples that are just starting to emerge in the real world. And so when you hand that kind of technology to someone like Vijay, you know, you then start to connect the dots to what this might mean for not only a specific customer's business, but to a whole industry.
So ground us in maybe some lessons from previous technological revolutions, because we're talking transformative and revolutionary technology here, not incremental, you know, making my business a little bit better. This is like changing everything from the apps to the infrastructure to the transformation. But what should we be aware of going in that we should set up as a bit of a caution and humility?
It is amazing what's happening, and what will be coming will be even more transformational than what we've seen over the past 2 years. But at least with the current state of the technology, it's not all easy. For example, there's the well-known problem of hallucination. And you know, hallucination is becoming less and less of a problem as these models are being given the permission to access information repositories and check their work and so on. But they are still prone to sometimes making mistakes, errors of logic, errors of math, even just errors of lack of rote memorization, and not realizing it and then just giving an answer that is incorrect, but dangerously incorrect in the sense that it always has some alignment to some other concept in the conversation. And that's something that we see every day is improving, and we expect to not be a practical issue in the future. But today, it's something that when you're thinking about using these tools, that you have to be careful of. There is the well-known and now very thoroughly studied issue of bias. And you know, there is a raging debate in the computer science world about whether biases can be repaired or mitigated in these models. But I think there will always be a sense, to the extent that these models learn from us, and that each of us is in some ways hopelessly biased, that these models will be likewise always have biases present. But one of the things that is so interesting about these models is even though, Gretchen, you are a hopelessly biased person,
It's true.
You also have a remarkable ability to spot biased decision-making made by others. And what we have found over and over again in our research is that the best large language models have a very similar quality, that they are extremely powerful tools in reviewing and understanding whether there are biases in decisions or in conclusions made by another AI system or by a human being. All of these things, though, create complexities and really speak to the need to really become familiar and grounded in some of the fundamentals I have a silly analogy that I think Gretchen, I know Vijay's heard, and I think you may have heard before, that I can share here. Imagine an alternate universe where we've just invented copper wire, and we've discovered that it can carry electric current efficiently from point A to point B. And we just know that this is going to change everything. But we don't know why yet, because we haven't yet invented the light bulb. And so, we don't really know what to do with this. Maybe some companies are building coat hangers and charging 10 times more than the old wooden coat hangers. There's a whole industry of copper wire manufacturers building up. Regulators are trying to figure out what this insulation business is about. Early adopters, maybe some of them are, causing fires in their homes. But as soon as that light bulb gets invented, as soon as we imagine, making electric motors out of these things, as soon as we even go a step further and start transmitting digital signals, everything in life gets better. Everything is transformed. And the situation that we have right now is to just understand that we are now all in possession of this copper wire. And it's really all up to all of us to try to imagine, what light bulbs we can invent with this.
I'm envisioning light bulbs popping up over our heads. What do you think, Vijay?
So in every one of the previous digital transformations, there was always potential for somebody to misuse my technology. When I did e-commerce, it was possible for somebody to provide fake orders or not pay, and so on. So one thing that always we have to do is to secure our endpoints. So if I'm an enterprise, I need provenance of every transaction, every request that's coming, and everyone who's generating data. And here, we'll have the same sort of thing, but here, the possibilities that you have to guard against are more. So again, let's take the example of logistics. If there are some really realistic looking inspection certificates, I need to know where they were generated. I need, whether it's blockchain or other technologies that actually have enough information from the context so I know what was the scenario where they were generated. Basically, we want trust in our digital operations. And as we exercise intelligence, if we can trust what we are operating upon, life becomes a lot easier. So we've learned a lot about how to guard endpoints, provide provenance, trace, audit, and so on. So those things do not go away. They will need to improve. But that's really something I advise always.
Well, we've alluded to a couple of topics I'd like to come back to, data being one, and multimodal models being another. And for now, thank you guys for coming in and talking about this. I will see you again shortly.